Hey guys, John here with the Backwoods Pursuit team, bringing you another gear review. Today we're looking at one of the lightest two-person tents on the market, the Zpacks Duplex Lite. At under 1 pound, I was pretty nervous the first time I took this into the backcountry, but I was pleasantly surprised when I watched it handle rain, wind, and yes, even snow like a champ. In the description below, you'll find links to the Duplex Lite, as well as our website, backwoodspursuit.com, and also our social media. This is the first Dyneema tent I've ever owned, and I was a little skeptical, maybe even a little bit nervous with how flimsy looking the fabric is, you know, almost translucent, and being paranoid about rocks cutting holes in the bottom of the tent or branches or twigs poking holes in the canopy. But after 5 trips now in remote backcountry locations, these are not designated campsites that I was setting it up in, I've been very, very impressed with this tent so far. The build of this tent is actually a pretty common design. I've actually used sil nylon tents in the past that had a very similar dual trekking pole design. The Duplex Lite is made of super light DCF fabric, which DCF stands for Dyneema composite fabric. The DCF material for the canopy of this tent is actually a little bit lighter weight than the material that they use for the floor. The floor is still DCF, but it's just a little bit thicker, adding durability where needed most. The tent also features 2 mesh rainbow zipper doors. The sidewall mesh material is very lightweight, had me a little nervous, but it hasn't failed me yet so far. I would probably rate this tent as like a 2.5 season tent. It worked really well for me about mid-April through September here in Idaho. This tent sets up incredibly easy and quickly. It takes me about 5 minutes to set this thing up from start to finish. It pitches with 8 stakes and 2 trekking poles, or instead of trekking poles, you can use the Zpacks side poles like I do. If you want, you can do it with just 6 stakes, but I prefer to have the head and the toe staked out just to give me a little more head and foot room. The interior of the tent is 40 inches wide by 90 inches long. They claim you can sleep 2 people in here. I actually just got this as a 1-person palace, basically. Maybe if you really, really like somebody and you both have 20-inch wide sleeping pads, maybe you could fit them in there, but it would definitely be a tight squeeze. The peak of the tent comes in at 48 inches tall, making it incredibly easy to sit up and move around inside of, as well as fairly easy to get in and out of. I'm 6 foot tall and found its 90-inch length to be just barely enough. With a single wall design, you really don't want your toe box of your sleeping bag touching the wall, as well as you don't want your head brushing up against the wall in case of condensation. Using this tent as a solo backpacker, there is definitely enough floor space to bring a bunch of gear into the tent with me, which I love, and still have plenty of space for my sleeping system. Even though this tent is open and breathes really well, I did experience some mild condensation on a couple of trips. One was where it rained and the ground was really wet, and the other time was when it snowed, so the air was real heavy with moisture. And that's where I found the overall length of the interior of the tent to come up just a little bit short. Like I said, I'm only 6 foot tall, but when I was on a 3.5-inch pad with my sleeping bag, I had to be really careful to make sure I positioned my sleep system so that my toe and my head wouldn't hit the ceiling. A lot of times that involved actually kind of sleeping diagonal inside of the tent, and that was even with having the ends guide out. You also really want to make sure that you have your sleep system dialed to the temperature it's going to be outside, because with this type of tent that's really breathable, really open, you're not going to be able to trap a lot of body heat inside the tent to, add any warmth to your sleep system. Now, moving to the outside of this tent, one of the things I really loved about this tent is the large dual vestibules. It's very easy to get your backpack and boots under just one of the vestibules, leaving the other side for a weapon like a bow or a rifle. The vestibules are connected to the guy line by a unique sliding J-hook connection. It can be a little bit of a pain when trying to reach outside of your tent to release the vestibule so you can get out if you need to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. You also have the option of rolling up the vestibules out of the way. I found this super handy while blowing up my sleeping pad, as well as putting my gear inside the tent. The vestibules performed really well in windy conditions, as well as rain and snow. As long as my gear was under the vestibules, it stayed dry. With the dual trekking pole design, this tent is definitely made to pack up in your pack and just keep moving. I found a lot of times I wanted to use this more as a spike tent, and luckily Zpacks sells a carbon fiber side pole that you can replace the trekking poles with. Now this does add weight. Each one of those carbon fiber poles weighs about 2.6 ounces, so you're adding a little over 5 ounces to your overall weight of the tent. But I found it super, super useful because now I can set the tent up with those carbon fiber poles, and then I can now throw my pack on, leave my tent, use my trekking poles, and go hike for the day with my trekking poles and not have to leave them at camp. I was definitely concerned with the sturdiness of the Zpacks carbon fiber side poles. They look like tent poles, they're very skinny, but on one of my trips, they handled gusts from 15 to 20 miles an hour incredibly well. And after that, I really wasn't worried about it anymore. Some of the things I loved about this tent were, first, its weight. I loved how lightweight it was. Even with the extra side poles, it comes in at 1.5 pounds for a very large, roomy one-person tent. The second thing I loved was the large dual vestibules. You have so much room under those vestibules. It's easy to fit a large backpack, your boots, your jet boil, as well as a bow or a rifle on the other side in the other vestibule. There's just a ton of room. The third thing I really loved was the ease of the pitch. You don't have to have a perfectly flat spot in order to pitch this tent. I pitched this tent multiple times in pretty tight areas, and it still worked great. The last thing I loved was the interior height, or the peak height. It was definitely easy to sit up in this tent. You can move around, you can put your pants on easily, you can get in and out of the tent pretty easy. So that tall height definitely makes it a lot easier to maneuver around inside of. So a couple of things that I didn't love about the tent. First was the overall length of 90 inches. By the time you get on top of your 3.5, 4-inch sleeping pad with your sleeping bag and your pillow, your head and your toe box are pushed all the way up into the side walls unless you kind of kick yourself on a diagonal. At 6 foot tall, I'm just kind of average height. I would really have loved it if they would have added another 4 or 5 inches to the length of the tent. Another thing I didn't love is those vestibule J-hooks can be a little difficult to reach because they made the vestibule so large, which is awesome. Those hooks are 2 feet away from the sidewall of the tent. So when you go to try to get out of the tent in the morning, you've got to reach 2 feet outside of the tent to try to unhook that. You got to loosen it and unhook it. It can be a little bit of a pain if you're trying to get out of the tent in the dark, you know, in case you need to go use the restroom or something like that. It can be difficult. The last thing I didn't love was the pack size. I already knew that Cuben fiber doesn't pack as tight as sil nylon, so I was expecting this already. But it definitely is true. It doesn't get as small as a 2-person dual trekking pole tent that's made out of sil nylon. The Zpacks Duplex Lite is definitely an expensive tent. I think we're all aware of that by now, as we know that Dyneema fabric is incredibly expensive, so you're definitely gonna pay for this. But what you're getting is an incredibly lightweight shelter that is very, very durable. I was skeptical at first, you know, with the Dyneema fabric versus sil nylon, and I've found that the Dyneema fabric is very, very tough, which really eased my fears when you look at how thin that fabric is. If you have the money to spend on a tent like this and want to know if this tent can withstand the abuse of the backcountry, the answer is definitely yes. There'll be a link to this tent in the description below, and feel free to drop us any questions you might have in the comment section below. We'd love to help.